I was standing in the county clerk's office, the fluorescent lights humming above me, when the woman behind the glass window slid a stack of papers across the counter. She tapped the top page with a freshly manicured nail and said, almost casually, "You'll want to look at line 17, Miss Turner. That's where the transfer was executed." Transfer. The word floated above me, strangely weightless, until I read the line for myself. My trust account. All $240,000 of it. Signed over. Reassigned. Gone. I felt the room narrow. The edges of my vision tightened around the black ink letters that spelled my mother's full legal name, her unmistakable signature looping neatly in the bottom right corner. And just beneath it, as though he had earned even the right to breathe near my inheritance, was the signature of her new husband. Victor Hale. A man I had tolerated for exactly 1 year and distrusted for precisely the same amount of time. I whispered, "This can't be real." The clerk gave a sympathetic tilt of her head. "The documents are notarized. It's all legally binding. 2 months old. 2 months. Which meant my mother had smiled at me, hugged me, asked about my garden, and told me she was proud of me, all while knowing she had already handed my future to a man who drank his dinners and laughed too loudly at his own stories. A coldness spread through my chest. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even angry yet. I was quiet. Quiet in the way the ocean pulls back before a wave rises. Quiet in the way a woman becomes when she realizes a betrayal has already happened and all that remains is the truth waiting to be uncovered. I stepped out of the clerk's office into late afternoon sunlight, the kind that should have felt warm but instead stung like a spotlight. Cars rolled by. Children shouted from a park nearby. Life continued, indifferent to my unraveling. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday? Victor's making his famous ribs." I stared at the message, reading it twice, then a third time. No hint of guilt. No tremor of remorse. Just an invitation, casual, familial, insulting in its normalcy. I typed nothing. I slipped my phone into my purse. And as I walked toward my car, each step steadied me. Because I knew then that whatever this was, whatever arrangement, coercion, manipulation, or delusion had led my mother to surrender what my father had spent his life building, this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The beginning of a path I had not expected to walk at 62 years old. A path toward truth, justice, and quiet, unwavering retribution. The kind of revenge that doesn't shout or threaten. The kind that waits, watches, documents. The kind that arrives not like a hammer, but like a mirror. As I unlocked my car, I looked back toward the courthouse, the building's stone facade glowing gold in the dying light. "This," I whispered, "isn't over." And I meant it. Because they had taken my inheritance. But they had not taken my resolve. Not yet. And they had no idea what was coming. My name is Evelyn Turner, and I am 62 years old. I have lived most of my life with a calm temperament, a thoughtful disposition, and a preference for gentle solutions over confrontations. I've raised 2 daughters, buried a husband, and weathered the great, uneven storms that midlife tends to deliver without warning. I speak slowly, not because I lack urgency but because I choose my words the way a jeweler selects stones, carefully, with an eye for clarity. I was not born fierce. Life carved that into me gradually. My father, God rest his soul, built a small construction company from nothing but stubbornness and skill. He saved every extra dollar he earned and tucked it away for me, his only child. That trust fund, now stolen, was his final gesture of love. Not because I needed the money, but because he wanted to ensure I would never be at the mercy of someone else's choices. My mother, however, has always been a different kind of weather. Unpredictable. Restless. At times beautifully kind, at others troublingly blind. When she married Victor, I tried to welcome him. I truly did. But a woman my age learns to read people the way a sailor reads the sky, every shift, every gust, every darkening hue in the clouds. Victor was a storm. You could smell the trouble before the thunder ever rolled. He complimented too intensely. Joked too intimately. Drank too frequently. And lived too comfortably on money that wasn't his. Still, my mother insisted he was a good man who deserved a second chance. A phrase she repeated so often it began to sound rehearsed, as though someone had folded the words into her and pressed them flat with an iron. I didn't push. I loved her, and she loved him, or thought she did. And at my age, you learn to let certain battles pass. Or at least you think you do. When my husband, Daniel, died 12 years ago, I learned two things. First, that grief never really leaves, its weight simply shifts to different corners of a room. And second, that being alone can either wilt you or sharpen you. I chose the latter. I kept to myself, tended my garden, volunteered at the library, hosted quiet dinners with my daughters and grandchildren. A peaceful life, steady, predictable, deeply my own. Which is why the betrayal stung as sharply as it did. Because it came not from an enemy, but from the person who should have been my safest harbor. My mother. At 62, you think you have already lived through the worst heartbreaks you will ever face. But the world has a way of surprising you, testing you, asking if you are still capable of protecting who you are and what you've built. That day at the courthouse, I discovered that I am more than capable. More than willing. I am a woman who does not seek vengeance for pleasure, but for balance. For truth. For dignity. And I would restore all three, no matter how long the path, no matter how tangled the roots. But first, I needed to understand how deeply the betrayal went. And who had truly orchestrated it. You don't grow up as an only child without becoming a careful observer of the people around you. My mother has always been a brilliant conversationalist, capable of charming a room into laughter with little more than a raised eyebrow. But beneath that charisma lived a yearning, an ache for companionship that she never learned to quiet. My father was steady, loyal, predictable. When he passed, she seemed to shrink in half. She filled the empty spaces with friendships, clubs, wine nights, travel, and eventually with Victor Hale, a man who made her feel young again, her words, not mine. My daughters tried to like him. They really did. But children, even adult ones, have a sense for danger that adults sometimes lose. They saw through him long before my mother would allow herself to. "Grandma's chasing something," my eldest said once after a family dinner. But I don't think it's happiness. Still, we kept the peace. Family harmony is a delicate art, and I have spent most of my life mastering it, smoothing edges, diffusing tension, redirecting conversations like a quiet conductor guiding instruments through a storm. But harmony requires honesty. And with Victor in the picture, truth became optional. Then there were the smaller signs. The ones you only recognize in hindsight. My mother stopped showing me her mail. She seemed evasive when finances were mentioned. She began using phrases like joint decision and we agreed more frequently, even when the topics involved matters she had never previously relinquished control over. Once, while visiting her, I passed by Victor's office, a room my mother never entered, and I saw him at the desk flipping through my father's old financial binders. When he saw me, he shut the folder too quickly, smiled too broadly, and said, "Just organizing things for your mom." I didn't push. Looking back, that was my mistake. The shift in our family dynamic was subtle but constant. Conversations grew shorter. My mother's tone, once warm and unwavering, now oscillated between defensive and overly cheerful. As though she were painting over cracks in the wall with too thin a coat of paint. But nothing prepared me for the distance that appeared once the trust money disappeared. She began canceling visits. She replied to messages with one-word answers. She spoke as though something fragile was balanced between us, and she was afraid I might knock it over. And maybe she knew, even before I did, that I would eventually uncover what she and Victor had done. Still, I tried to approach her gently. Because family is not something you discard. It's something you tend, even when the roots grow tangled. One evening, weeks before I learned the truth, I asked her, "Mom, are you happy?" She blinked, startled by the question. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Because something feels off, I said softly. And I don't want you to be afraid to tell me. She looked away then, toward the kitchen window where the reflection of her own face stared back. I just need you to trust me, Evelyn, she said. Victor deserves a second chance. He's had a hard life. It was the first time she had spoken those words directly to me. The first time I realized they weren't her words at all. And the first moment I felt a cold, creeping dread settle beneath my ribs. I didn't know yet what she had done. But I knew, from the way her voice wavered, that whatever it was already too late to prevent. The discovery of the betrayal was not cinematic. It was not dramatic, or explosive, or marked by some stormy revelation. It was quiet. Bureaucratic. Almost insultingly mundane. I had gone to the courthouse simply to request updated documents for my own estate planning. A routine chore. But when the clerk asked whether I wanted copies of the amendments filed earlier that year, a tingling unease rolled through me. Amendments? I asked. She nodded. To your trust account. Executed by your legal trustee. My trustee was my mother. By the time she slid the papers to me, some part of me, old, instinctive, already recognized the shape of the disaster. But nothing could have prepared me for the ink on those pages. The trust my father created for me at 21. The account he safeguarded decade after decade. The nest egg meant to protect me at any age. Legally reassigned to Victor Hale as a temporary beneficiary with unrestricted access for emergency liquidity. Emergency liquidity. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the wording, clearly crafted by someone who believed formality could hide immorality. The notarization date was a gut punch, 2 months before my mother stopped speaking to me freely. There was no dispute, no discussion, no warning. Just a quiet signing, a pen gliding across thick paper, while I remained entirely unaware that my future was being rewritten in another room. The betrayal was raw, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Trust. Respect. My father's love. My mother's loyalty. My sense of safety in the world. All severed in the swish of a pen. I sat in my car afterward, the documents trembling in my hands. My breath came slow, controlled, deliberate, because I refused to cry over something that still made no sense. Why would my mother do this? And why for him? There were obvious possibilities. She was manipulated. She was coerced. She was charmed. Or she simply believed the illusion Victor crafted of himself, a man reborn, deserving, trustworthy. But illusions eventually collapse. And I would make sure this one did. I drove home with a stillness I can only describe as surgical. Every emotion I felt slid into lined compartments, anger in one, sadness in another, determination in all the rest. I wasn't going to shout. Or accuse. Or storm into their home and demand explanations. That's not how a woman like me responds. Instead, I would investigate quietly, meticulously, like my father taught me. Measure twice, he always said, and cut once. Victor had cut deeply. And I would make sure the cut he felt in return was clean, precise, and irreversible. But before any path toward justice could begin, I needed answers. And answers rarely live where people want them to. They hide. They soften themselves. They bury themselves beneath justifications and excuses. But truth, real truth, always leaves a trail. And I was ready to follow it. Within 48 hours of discovering the transfer, I had an appointment with a probate attorney named Melissa Fenton. She was sharp, calm, and refreshingly direct, exactly the kind of woman you want beside you when your life has just been quietly dismantled. She studied the documents, flipping between pages with increasing tension in her jaw. Finally she looked at me. Evelyn, this appears to be a coerced transfer. I folded my hands in my lap. Explain. Your mother had full legal authority to manage the trust, yes. But the language here, the circumstances, the timing, suggest influence. Pressure. Someone likely convinced her she was making a responsible choice. I didn't need her to say the name. Victor. Melissa continued, will need proof of undue influence. Emails, messages, financial withdrawals, contradictions in her statements. Anything that demonstrates that the decision wasn't truly hers. So I began looking. And the truth emerged, slowly at first, like dust rising from an old attic, but then all at once, overwhelming. My mother's phone records showed dozens of calls and texts from Victor during business hours, all marked urgent. Her emails revealed a pattern of inquiries about financial adjustments she had never discussed with anyone else, not even me. Their joint bank statements made my stomach twist, withdrawals totaling nearly $90,000 over 8 months. Cash. Untraceable once spent. But the worst discovery came from a neighbor who lived 2 doors down from my mother. I stopped by her house under the guise of delivering homemade bread, but she saw through me instantly. You're here about Victor, she said. I nodded. She sighed. I've heard them arguing. More than once. Loud enough that the dog starts barking. What do they say? It's mostly him. Threatening to leave her if she doesn't support him. Telling her she betrayed him by doubting him. Saying she owes him. Owes him. My mother, who had worked, saved, sacrificed, owes him. I thanked the neighbor and left, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I intended. The puzzle pieces were forming an ugly picture. Victor had not just manipulated my mother. He had isolated her. Convinced her that loyalty meant surrendering judgment. Twisted her grief, her loneliness, her yearning for second chances into a weapon. My father's trust fund wasn't the first thing he drained. Just the largest. Melissa prepared documents for discovery. I prepared myself for confrontation. But before any legal action could unfold, one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was the money now? A forensic accountant found the answer buried in wire transfer logs. Victor had siphoned $80,000 into a private brokerage account under his name. Another $30,000 into a credit card debt he had hidden from my mother. The rest, well over $100,000, had been moved into an investment opportunity run by one of his old drinking buddies. A man recently arrested for securities fraud. Melissa closed the file. We have enough to proceed. I looked out the window at the afternoon sky turning darker by the minute. My mother still believes he loves her, I whispered. Melissa's voice softened. Then we'll show her the truth. But truth alone doesn't free a person. Sometimes, it breaks them first. And I feared what the truth would do to my mother. Yet I had no choice but to follow it wherever it led. Even if it meant shattering the last remaining illusions she held. The night before I confronted my mother, I barely slept. Not because I feared the conversation, but because I knew what it would take from me. Strength is never free. It demands something: courage, clarity, sacrifice. Sometimes all three. I sat in my dimly lit kitchen at 4 a.m., the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I reread the documents Melissa assembled. The evidence. The bank records. The notarized transfer. The timeline of manipulation. By sunrise, my resolve had crystallized. I wasn't just retrieving money. I was protecting the last remaining piece of my father's legacy. And I was rescuing my mother from a man who had wrapped himself around her loneliness like ivy around old brick, beautiful from afar, destructive beneath the surface. At noon, I drove to their house. The moment my mother opened the door, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She had begun to age rapidly, subtle lines deepened, shoulders dropped, spirit dimmed. Evelyn, she said gently, I didn't expect you. I know, I replied. We need to talk. She hesitated. Is this about the trust? I inhaled slowly. Yes. Her eyes closed. A tremble ran through her fingers. I was going to explain. But explanations are meaningless when truth is absent. We sat at the dining table, the same place we had shared countless birthdays, holidays, laughter, and secrets. The same place where, unbeknownst to me, she had signed away my inheritance. I placed the documents between us. She didn't reach for them. Instead, she whispered, he needed help. He needed control, I corrected. Then I showed her everything. The bank statements. The transfers. The securities fraud connection. The withdrawals. The proof of coercion. The records of their arguments. My mother's face crumpled. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just, softly. Like a veil slipping from her. He told me it was temporary, she said. He said he'd pay it back. He said he was ashamed to ask you. He said you'd hate him. I leaned forward. Mom, he lied. She nodded slowly, as though she had known that truth in some deep, buried place but never had the strength to face it. Then a voice thundered from the hallway. What the hell is all this? Victor. He stormed into the room, red-faced, heavy-footed, smelling faintly of whiskey though it was barely past noon. He grabbed one of the documents and skimmed it, then threw it onto the table. You went digging, he snarled. I went discovering, I said evenly. He jabbed a finger at me. This is none of your damn business. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Legally, it's entirely my business. And morally, it should have been my mother's. My mother looked between us, between the life she thought she had and the truth unraveling before her. Victor, she whispered, did you use Evelyn's trust for your debts? He scoffed. Debts? Opportunities. Investments. You never supported my ambitions. And there it was, the confession he didn't mean to give, spoken with the arrogance of a man who believed he would never face consequences. I stood. This ends now. His face twisted. You're overreacting. Family forgives. Your mother knows that. But forgiveness without accountability is just permission. And I would not permit him to take anything more. I'm filing action, I said. Against you. And for the full restoration of the trust. Victor laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You think you'll win? I met his gaze. I don't think. I know. Because he didn't realize yet that the silence I carried wasn't fear. It was strategy. Legal processes move slowly, but consequences, real consequences, move with an eerie kind of speed once the first crack appears. Victor's downfall began with a single envelope delivered to their doorstep. Inside was a formal notice of legal action, a petition for the reversal of the trust transfer and an investigation into financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He wasn't arrested. Not yet. But the fear in his eyes said he knew what was coming. Within a week, Melissa and her team had uncovered even more: unpaid taxes, misrepresented income, a prior bankruptcy he'd hidden from my mother, and a trail of suspicious financial relationships that practically screamed fraud. But the most devastating blow was not legal. It was emotional. My mother moved out. She called me late one night, her voice thin but steady. I'm staying with your cousin for a while, she said. I need space, and clarity. She didn't have to explain further. She was finally choosing herself. Something she hadn't done since my father died. Without her income, without her emotional dependency, without her presence to validate his ego, Victor's entire facade began collapsing. He tried calling her 27 times in 3 days. She didn't answer once. He tried showing up at her cousin's house. She refused to come outside. He tried leaving long, rambling voicemails dripping with apologies, threats, tears, and assurances that everything had been misunderstood. But the thing about manipulation is this: once a person sees its mechanics, the gears turning beneath the charm, they can never unsee it. Meanwhile, the law tightened quietly around him. The investment firm he'd funneled money into collapsed under federal investigation, dragging his accounts into forensic review. His brokerage account was frozen. His credit lines were suspended. His old drinking buddy, now in custody, named him in a plea deal. Piece by piece, his financial world disintegrated. He didn't rage publicly. He didn't storm into my home. He didn't make grand gestures of vengeance. Instead, he grew silent. And a silent man with something to lose is far more broken than one who shouts. One afternoon, while leaving the attorney's office, I saw him sitting alone in his truck across the street. Shoulders slumped. Staring at the steering wheel as though it held the answers to his unraveling life. Our eyes met. He looked away first. That was the moment I knew he understood, fully, irreversibly, that this time there was no persuading, no charming, no twisting his way out. Truth had finally cornered him. A month later, he signed the settlement agreement. He relinquished all claim to my trust. He repaid what remained of the funds, every last cent that could be legally extracted. He forfeited his right to manage any portion of my mother's finances. He acknowledged, in writing, his misconduct. It was not a dramatic downfall. It was not loud or public or humiliating. But it was complete. He simply faded, stripped of influence, power, access, and the illusions he built his life upon. In the end, he walked away with nothing but the echo of everything he had tried to take. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of justice. Once the dust settled, the silence that followed felt unfamiliar, like returning to a home after a long, storm-ravaged winter. Nothing was broken beyond repair, but everything needed tending. My mother moved into a small apartment near the river, a place filled with morning light and second chances. She invited me over one afternoon, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that trembled just slightly. "I'm so ashamed," she whispered. I sat across from her. "You were vulnerable. He preyed on that. I should have known better." I reached for her hand. "He worked very hard to make sure you didn't." She cried then, not dramatically, not noisily. Just a soft release of sorrow that had been gathering beneath her ribs. I let her cry. Sometimes healing begins with permission. In the weeks that followed, she began therapy. She attended financial counseling. She reconnected with old friends she had neglected during her marriage to Victor. She even took up painting again, something she hadn't touched since my father was alive. One afternoon, while studying a canvas filled with messy but joyful strokes of color, she said, "I feel like I'm waking up." And she was. As for me, I regained control of my trust fund, though the money felt different now, weightier, more symbolic. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a reclamation. My daughters visited often, bringing laughter back into a home that had been too quiet. My eldest hugged me once and said, "Mom, you handled all of this with so much dignity." I smiled. Dignity is more powerful than anger. But healing isn't linear. There were moments, small ones, when bitterness tugged at me. When I wondered how my mother could have chosen anyone, let alone him, over the legacy my father left behind. When I replayed the signing of those documents, imagining the pen in her hand, the hesitation she must have felt, the pressure she must have been under. And yet, each time the bitterness rose, I returned to the truth. She was misled. She was lonely. And she was human. What mattered now was not what had happened but what she chose going forward. One evening, as we sat together watching the river from her balcony, she said quietly, "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," I replied. "No," she insisted, "you held the light while I found the path." I didn't argue. Sometimes people need to give gratitude as part of their healing. Victor, for his part, slipped out of our lives entirely. I heard through legal channels that he left the state, likely chasing another scheme, another sympathetic soul, another chance to rebuild the illusion of himself. But he would no longer find those opportunities in my family. The final piece of healing required forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. For not seeing the signs sooner. For not protecting my mother fast enough. for believing our family was immune to such manipulation. But forgiveness, like healing, grows slowly. And I chose to let it grow. When I look back on everything that happened, the betrayal, the unraveling, the investigation, the quiet justice, I don't see a story about money. Not anymore. I see a story about clarity. About the courage to face truth even when it shatters the narrative you want to believe. I used to think betrayal was always loud, sudden, explosive. But now I know it can be gentle, disguised as care, whispered through reassurances and second chances. My mother once told me that love makes you blind. But I've learned that real love doesn't blind you, it teaches you to see more clearly. If there is a moral to my story, it is this. When someone asks you to ignore your instincts, you are not being invited into trust. You are being invited into danger. And when they ask for a second chance, make sure they've earned the first one. Another truth I carry now is that justice does not need to roar. It can arrive quietly, through documentation, persistence, and unwavering steadiness. A calm woman with evidence is far more powerful than a loud man with excuses. My father used to say, integrity is what remains when everything else falls away. I didn't understand it fully until now. Victor lost everything because his foundation was built on deceit. My mother regained herself because she returned to truth. And I rebuilt my peace not by punishing, but by illuminating. In the end, revenge is not about destruction. It is about restoration. Restoring clarity. Restoring boundaries. Restoring the simple, sacred right to live without manipulation. If you've lived long enough, and I have, you learn that justice rarely arrives in dramatic flashes. More often, it comes as a steady, deliberate step forward, one you take even when your heart trembles. I took that step. And I would take it again. As for my mother, she lives quietly now, painting landscapes of the river she overlooks. Sometimes I join her, sitting beside her in the late afternoon light. We don't always speak about what happened. We don't need to. Some stories settle into the air between people, understood without being retold. She asked me once, "Do you think I'll ever forgive myself?" I answered honestly. Yes. When you're ready. Because forgiveness is not a door someone opens for you. It's a key you carve for yourself. When I walk through my garden these days, I think of my father. I think of the legacy he left, not just in money, but in the values he instilled. He believed in fairness, in hard work, in protecting what matters. And I like to think he would be proud of how I carried that forward. My story is not extraordinary. It is not unique. Financial exploitation happens quietly in far too many families. But perhaps that is why stories like mine need to be told. Because silence protects the wrong people. So here is my final truth. Revenge is not the act of hurting someone back. It is the act of reclaiming what should never have been taken. And I reclaimed everything, my trust, my voice, my peace, and the relationship with my mother that is now healthier than it has been in decades. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Listen to your instincts. Document everything. And when the moment comes, when the truth finally demands to be acted upon, step forward with calm conviction. You are stronger than you think. And justice is quieter than you expect.